Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 244, an ambassador for African choirs with Ken Wakia. Recently named one of the 100 most influential Africans, Ken Wakia joins me to share his history as a Kenyan choral musician and founder of the successful Nairobi Chamber Chorus. In this episode, I am honored to speak with Ken, who shares his inspiring journey from a small village by Lake Victoria, where he was literally forced to sing in choir, you'll hear that story later, to becoming a recognized international figure in choral music. He discusses the cultural perceptions of music education in Africa, the evolution of choral music, and the impact of the Nairobi Chamber Chorus. Ken emphasizes in this episode the importance of music as a tool for communication and understanding across cultures, and reflects on the recognition he has received for his contributions to the field. Also in this episode, we will touch on choral music that has deep roots in African culture, which even predates what we now call a choir. The Nairobi Chamber Chorus's aims to reflect Kenya's diverse cultures and a recognition in the arts that can change perceptions of how we value music and much more. So stick around and listen to this conversation. And then, of course, have your thoughts stimulated. And if your thoughts are stimulated, I want to hear about them over in the Choralosophers Facebook page, or you can always go over to the Substack at choralosophy.substack.com or email choralosophy@gmail.com. There's lots of ways to be a part of the conversation, and I hope you will join in. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber to this show. That's not required, but if you want me to keep doing it forever, I'm going to have those people subscribed. You can start at $3 a month, all the way up to $20 a month. And on Patreon, there's a list of different levels with different perks, so to speak. Or on Substack, you can simply upgrade your free subscription there to a paid subscription. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Ken Wakia. Ken is a choir director from Nairobi, and of course, I'm going to let him tell us more about him, but I'm really excited to speak with Ken, especially to get a perspective on choral music that maybe I wouldn't be aware of because I don't sit and walk in Ken's shoes. So Ken, welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, and if you could, start specifically with your introduction to music and choral music. Is there a little Ken story that got you to where you are today to fall in love with music?
There's a very long story, Chris, and it goes back to my childhood. You know, I was born in a little village on the western part of Kenya by what we call Lake Victoria. I guess from the name, you can probably figure out a few things because Victoria is not typical to Africa, you know. So
Right.
I was born by the Lake Victoria, a place called Kanyada. Now, because of globalization and interaction, we tend to, in our social settings, when we are in the city, we tend to ask people to pronounce it as Canada. And we say, I'm from Canada, but essentially it is Kanyada. Kanyada is a small little district area by the Lake Victoria. Specifically, the village I was born in is called Konya. Konya is a village within Homa Bay County. Now, why is this background important to me? You know, having been born by the Lake Victoria in Homa Bay, Some time back, we were raised in a very traditional way. I grew up from the village looking after cattle. My family was not well to do, and therefore I was brought up in a grass thatched house with a mud floor. Now, fast forward a little bit. At the age of about 7 years, I think, my dad was working in a sugar production farm, and he picked me as one of his children to go and live with him in this place. It's called Mumias.
Okay.
A little bit about my dad. My dad was polygamous, by the way. My dad had about 5 wives.
Wow.
Yes, and I was the second born of the second wife. And traditionally, when a man is polygamous and he works elsewhere in a town or the city, he tends to live there with his youngest wife. Sorry about that. It might not necessarily be the youngest wife in age, but it's the youngest wife in the chronological marriage order. And so my mom stayed in the village, but my dad picked me to go and live with him in Mumias. And so there I went and joined a nice school called Mumias Complex, but at class 2. When I was in the village, I attended class 1, or what you may call it grade 1, I think, K1. I attended class 1 in a small school called Ruga Primary School. And at that time, we were studying under a tree because we didn't have enough classrooms to take care of the population. So I did class 1 in Ruga, and then my dad pulled me out, took me to Mumias, and this is where I joined one of the best primary schools in the country. The primary school was patronized by the sugar company. And so we were a little lucky to have a few resources, and we had nicely built classrooms and we had good teachers. Anyway, at Mumias Complex, I was a very good footballer while in grade 2, 3, 4. And I loved to play football. I think you guys call it soccer, but
That's right.
in Africa we call it football. Anyway, so I played a lot of football. But when I got to grade 5, I think, no, grade 6. At grade 6, our primary school deputy principal, who was also the choir master, went into the classrooms and he asked everyone, you stand up and you sing the national anthem. And he was very good at hearing the singers. His name is Lamek Litieka. Now, Lamek came to our classroom and, I was trying to hide while he asked us to sing the national anthem, tried to hide away. But immediately after we finished singing the anthem, he would go around and point at individuals and saying, you're in my choir now. And so come to rehearsals tomorrow. As you can imagine, this was the worst thing I wanted to hear because I had absolutely no interest in choir whatsoever. Anyway, so at that time, you would not dare go against the teacher. Teachers were really well-respected members of the society. They wielded a lot of authority within the community. And so I said, okay, I seem to have no option. I went. The next day I went to choir rehearsal. I was very small by that time, and I was very easy to pick out because of my height. I was small, very short. The first rehearsal I attended, I didn't like it, and I went under the table and walked out of the door, went to the field to play football. Now, because I was easily identifiable, the teacher could tell that I had sneaked out. And those were the days when smirking was still allowed. teachers would smug children, they would smug students. It's not so much
Yes.
now. And so the next day, he would call me to his office and say, "You sneaked away from my rehearsal." And I would be whipped, 3-5 strokes of the cane. I was like, this is too much. Anyway, so the next day I got to the choir rehearsal, but I still had the urge to go to the field. So I do the same thing again. Anyway, after three times of being smacked, I said, "All right, then I shall stay." Okay. So I stayed on, sang, and then we started going to the music festivals. We had time away from school. We were given bread and soda for lunch, and we traveled in a van. I don't know, in America you would call it a truck. It was a big, big truck that would carry about 40 of us, and it had just rows of metal seats
Yeah.
start facing each other. So we went for the music festivals and we won. And that moment of going to the music festival was so interesting to me because I felt like we had achieved something, and I started feeling a sense of satisfaction, a sense of achievement, and going out there, interacting with other students from other schools. So anyway, because the festivals were in levels, if you win this level, you go to the next level and on to the next level until you get to what is called the nationals. And the national level was in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. Now, how exciting to be able to go to Nairobi, because this was the dream of everybody. As time went by and we went to the festivals, we won every level, I started really enjoying this. It was a really nice feeling. Long story short, I gave up football and stayed
Wow.
in the choir. And when I went to high school, what we called secondary school, when I went to secondary school, I voluntarily joined the choir. And that was in Musingu High School, another part of Kenya called Kakamega, still in the western part of Kenya. So I went to Musingu High School, and then I enjoyed being in the choir. I found, again, the choir in high school was very competitive, also winning trophies and going from the lowest level to the nationals. Again, we were still going to Nairobi. So anyway, in the end, I really appreciated my primary school teacher, Mr. Litieka, for opening this avenue for me. And today, were it not for choral music, were it not for being a member of the choir, were it not for my choir days in primary school, secondary school, university, I would not be where I am. And I would not be the person that I am. So that's my story. And, let me also add that because of that background in choir at primary school, when I got to secondary school, because my dad did not make enough money to pay for my school fees, when students were being sent away from school because of school fees, I was let to stay in school because I was an important member of the choir. So while in Musingo High School, I scraped through my Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, Form 4 because of my membership in the choir. And after Form 4, which is I think it's grade 11 or grade 12 in your system. After that, we sit for a national examination, which determines whether you go on to the university or you fall by the wayside and go to tertiary college or some training of sorts if you want. When we did our Form 4, before that, you're supposed to choose which subjects you want to take at the university before you do the final exams. And again, my music teacher at high school, Mr. Matendechere, he encouraged me to choose music education. And when I went back home to tell my dad that I had chosen to go to the university to do music education, my dad was furious. Furious. He said, "You can not possibly do something like that. I mean, you can't go to the university just to sing." Because for our parents, I don't want to say African parents, but for most of our parents who have no exposure in what music is. So if you're going to the university to take music, it means you're going to the university just to sing. And for them, this is not, it's not prestigious enough. This is not going to earn you a good living after, Chris, maybe they're right though.
Yeah.
So my dad was furious at the thought that I'm going to choose music as my university degree course. So he encouraged me to take engineering. He wanted me to do engineering. And, I like engineering and I liked using my hands to do mechanical things. But I was no longer interested in that kind of stuff. I was interested in music and that's what I wanted to do. So to satisfy my dad, because we had three choices, the first thing I chose was music education. And then, of course, I chose my dad's choice of engineering. And then he did not know the third choice I made, but it was also music. So I chose music, engineering, music. Fair enough. My results came. I wasn't, I'm an average student, so I didn't score all A's, A minuses. I scored just enough to get me into the university. And sure enough, I got called to go and take music education. My dad escorted me to the university, and that was the last time he asked how I was doing at school.
Wow.
He dropped me at the university in Nairobi, Kenyatta University, and he went back home. He never asked me any questions again until I told him I was graduating. Then he came for the graduation. He didn't ask any further questions. Even though I was posted to teach in a school in Nairobi, he didn't want to really know much about it. Fast forward, after my graduation, I got auditioned by one of the greatest Kenyan choral musicians called Boniface Muganga. He auditioned me for the World Youth Choir, and I got accepted for the World Youth Choir. And I went to Japan. I went back home, told my dad I've been invited to travel to Japan to sing in a choir. And my dad was like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way you are going to travel to Japan just to sing. And I told him, well, that's what's happening. And I did not ask him for the air ticket. I very luckily was teaching in a nice school where the school board gave me a loan to pay for my air ticket. And so I told him, yeah, I'm off. I'm going to Japan. And do you know what, Chris? I was probably the second or third person to get onto a plane in our entire village.
Wow.
I was certainly the first one to get on a plane from my family. And so, the elders started wondering, really? He's gone where? He's gone to Japan. To do what? To sing in the World Youth Choir. And all of a sudden, my dad started getting elders asking him, how did this happen? And he started being famous in the village as the old man whose son has gone on the plane and has gone abroad. And so he started, all of a sudden, he was becoming very popular and he became proud of my work for the first time. So when I came back, everyone wanted to know how it was. What was the experience like? And I tell you what, Chris, if it were not for music, it were not for my choral singing, if it were not for choral music, none of this would have happened.
Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. Right.
And you might have even read that I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Miami, studying with Michael Scheibe. And if it were not for choral music, that would never.
Right. Wow, Ken, that is just an incredible story. And I would say there are probably 240 or so guests that have appeared on this show, and I will have to say that you are the first to say that you were literally whipped and beaten into singing in choir, because I've asked that question to everybody, and I've never gotten that answer before. So congratulations. But I would say there's some interesting things in your story I want to ask you some questions about and to kind of drill into.
Ask away.
So one of those is actually your dad, because you told how that story of his, the way he looked at your work kind of came full circle. First thing I have to ask is, do you feel like he just was doing his best and didn't know any better? Or do you feel like you kind of resent the fact that it took him so long to support you? How do you feel about that?
Well, Chris, there's a lot of things that are culturally driven. Whereas I felt bad that my dad was pushing me to do something else. I did not blame him. Because the Kenyan society is very is driven by academics. For us, going to school is a sure route to success. But even when you're in school, what you study in school is what will make you successful. And this is according to, the mindset. People still do not know that you can take your own route and do something that you like, be successful in it, and make a life out of it. And particularly something like music, which is still frowned upon. And I've traveled all over, and I also know that it's very similar in many countries, that musicians don't make much money, and therefore for a traditional man from a village in Kenya who wants his son to make so much money in future, the music is not all that attractive, because he can see what's happening. It's only the doctors who make enough money. It's all the engineers that make much money. We can talk about how they make the money later on, but it's ingrained in our minds that there are certain careers that will make you financially viable than being a teacher, being a musician. And I think most societies are like this. So if it is that way in the West, you can imagine how much ingrained it is in Africa, where we have a lot of people trying to get out of the poverty. And for African parents, their children is often their way out of poverty. It's the other way around. In the West, I know that parents always struggle to make money, and they can leave that for their children. It's the other way around in Africa, where the parents hope that their children are going to get them out of poverty. And this was the case with my dad as well, because he just wanted his son to make enough money so that he could get out of the situation that he was in. So no, I did not blame my dad, and he and I disagreed on so many other things, and I blamed him for those, but not the case of him wanting me to do something else other than music. It was just purely cultural. It's what the society looks at, that you're going to school, you're going to do something more interesting, and when you come back, you're going to make lots of money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting transition actually in our conversation because you mentioned that in many societies in the West, the generational wealth flows the other direction, which oftentimes is very true. There's not as many Americans as a lot of people think that actually for it's kind of a crude way to say it, but die with money left over. Most Americans don't, but we do have more compared to the rest of the world that do that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because what I understand about Africa, and feel free to correct me if you think this is misunderstanding this, but one of the reasons that it could be that way in many African countries is because the African economies are growing faster than a lot of other countries in the world because of course there's obvious reasons. We don't have to do a whole podcast on colonization. Why that would be just now happening, but because of that growth. And I wonder if there's also an interesting conversation there about choral music itself, because as societies and as cultures become more economically viable, then they have time and space in their culture for the arts, for a choir, for an orchestra, for a band, whatever, even regardless of the style of music, there's more room for the arts. Would you say that the arts and choral music are flourishing and growing in Africa?
I would say so, Chris. And it's interesting you bring that up because I think capitalism is a very interesting aspect in music in general. And a lot of what I'll say is really my personal opinion and my personal feeling that I think there are certain things that you just cannot change for money, and you cannot put a value on certain things, which I blame capitalism for really destabilizing certain industries. Particularly for me, music is a very important aspect of culture. And I do not believe that you can put a value on culture. So, whereas choral music is developing in Africa, sometimes I want to question what the meaning of that is. When you say choral music is developing, what does that really mean? Because as Africans, and to be honest, I think as human beings, we've always had choral music. We've always sung.
Yes.
And our immediate access to music, in my opinion, is singing. Because that voice is your first instrument before you take on to the violin, before you take on to the drums. And so I think I will say yes, choral music industry is developing in Africa. But when I say that, often find that question a bit biased because it often is implied that the organized choral music, a choir, organized choir, people come to rehearse once, twice, three times a week. That's happening a bit more. But for us in Africa, since time immemorial, we have been singing. We sing while we are looking after cattle. We sing when we are at a party. We sing everywhere. So it's that organized singing in a choir that is often implied with that kind of a question, whether choral music is developing in Africa or not. And the quick answer to that is yes, it is developing. Yet there are still some challenges to it because,
Sure.
we have started monetizing culture. And so when you form a choir today in Africa, people start thinking, how much is it going to take me to take public transportation to come for rehearsal? How long are we going to rehearse, and how much am I going to pay to go back to my house? And how am I going to get that money? But previously, we did not do that. Someone just said, I have something happening, and the whole village came, and people sang from morning to evening, or from evening to dawn, and it was a beautiful thing. But now, when you want to organize it in some sort of format, saying I want 50 singers for my choir, then you have to think all about the expenses. And so the development is coming with its own challenges. And it's all becoming economically either viable or unviable. And you find that because of the economic status of the people who would like to be in the choir, therefore, do you have as many choir members as would wish to be in your choir or not? There are people who want to come to that rehearsal, but they can't make it. This is the other thing that happens. Because we have monetized the whole singing thing in Africa, now some people now come to the choir thinking, what's the benefit in it for me? What's in it for me? We no longer just come to sing because it's beautiful, it's something nice, I want to just socialize. But yeah, so the economy in Africa is developing, and so is choral music going with it. But there are so many other challenges that this has brought.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think a really good summary, and I appreciate the attempt at kind of nuance and separating out the way you answered that question, because I think that is really important. And the way I would describe it, first of all, some of those challenges sound like challenges we have here in the United States too. A lot of those are, especially a chorister not being able to make it to rehearsal. That's a relatively common thing, a universal challenge. But I want to go back to what you said a second ago about making the distinction between the kind of group singing that has been happening in Africa, and I would argue in almost every human culture, since time immemorial.
Yeah.
But how that is distinct from a formal choir, where, for example, a person like yourself can have a job doing that, right? Where like that is your job, or that is my job, and that's how I support my family and whatever. But that does take economic development in a sense to get to the point where my community here, for example, can pour enough resources into the school so that the school can hire me to simply come in and teach kids to sing in a choir every day.
Yeah.
That is something that's really a cool thing, I think. But I appreciate that you pointed out the difference, because that is not to devalue the kind of singing that simply happens spontaneously throughout the community. Yeah. People who are gathering to sing and harmonize. I grew up that way too. My grandmother would just sit at the piano and start playing something, and we would hum and we would make chords and we would sing as dinner was being prepared, and that kind of thing. And that is an important part. And I would argue probably that is the root of the choral art form is that people do sing in community. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm going to push you now to brag a little bit, because recently you were named one of the 100 most influential Africans, and Africa is a freaking big continent, so that's a pretty cool thing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, how that came about, and what that meant to you?
Thank you, Chris, and I really appreciate that tag as top 100 most influential Africans in the creative category. Chris, I really don't know how that came about, but I can also say that I do know, because I've been in this industry now for a little while. And there's one thing I often tell my singers. When I started the Nairobi Chamber Chorus in 2005, October. So we are 20 years this year. I did not know that it was going to be that influential, and I did not really know that the Nairobi Chamber Chorus was going to be so successful. But the one thing I always tell my singers before we start a concert, I always tell them, you never know who is watching. You never know who is listening. You never know who is in the audience. And for me, that statement has been true for the 20 years that I've been running the Nairobi Chamber Chorus. Because often after a concert, 3 days later, a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, I get this phone call or an email asking, someone tells me, I watched your concert, the one you did at this and that hall 7 months ago, and I really liked the choir. Would you guys be available for a gig? I'm having this birthday party. Would you be able to come? I'm having this, Christmas party. Would you guys be able to come? So it's someone who listened to the choir 3, 4, 5, 7 months ago who still remembers this.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for me. I have never known who is watching me do what and where. So at 2024, I got this email telling me, by the way, you have been nominated as one of the top 100 influential musicians in Africa. I was like, wait a minute, why? And, why me? And then I waited to read the write-up, the narration, and it was all about the Nairobi Chamber Chorus and what I have done with the Nairobi Chamber Chorus. It was really refreshing to me to realize that something I started 20 years ago had become this well known. It had been recognized in this way. One of the things, Chris, that we musicians, particularly choral musicians, go through is the lack of appreciation. We do quite a lot. And we often feel less appreciated because choral music is not one of those hippie kind of things. When you have 5,000 people in the audience, that's a real achievement. And a lot of people still look at choral music as a little bit of an elitist world, So it really surprised me that someone has been watching, people have been watching, and that my name is even fronted for this very prestigious award was for me quite humbling. And it just went to tell me that whatever I have been doing is the right thing and that I need to continue doing it the way I've been doing it, because there is people out there who appreciate what we are doing. There are people out there who really find value in what we are doing, and they recognize. I had never really felt so important, and I still don't feel that important even now. Yes, Africa is a big continent. It's the next big thing, and to be recognized among so many people is really an achievement. I can only thank God for giving me that opportunity. How did it happen? As I said, someone has been watching. There's people.
Someone nominated you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was the second time that I was receiving such an email. Some time back in 2019, I also received a very similar email from a magazine, I think in Holland. It's published in Holland. And they said, oh, you've been nominated as the African image maker, And I said, where has this come from? So,
right.
Yeah, someone is watching. As we say, Big Brother is watching. So you better not be naughty. So I really feel humbled by the recognition, and it just goes to tell me that I need to continue doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You definitely do. You're making an impact. Now, two things jump out at me there about your story as well. One is that I also identify with that idea that you, I think, rightly pointed out, which is that sometimes we as choral musicians don't feel like people appreciate or really get what it is that what we're trying to do. Almost like sometimes I feel like we get judged by non-musicians as on a scale of whether or not we're achieving the fame that a pop musician does, and I try to explain to them, like, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. Like,
No.
I'm not trying to sell, get zillions of downloads on Spotify.
No.
Like, that's not really the point. I remember one time I had my choir that I lead here in Kansas City had been asked to sing like backup harmonies for some famous musician that was going through the city. And of course, people who had never paid attention to anything I'd ever done suddenly are saying things to me like, "Wow, you finally made it." And I'm like, like no, No, this is like a weekend gig for me. It's not that big of a deal. But because I was singing with Josh Groban, that was the biggest thing. And then the other thing that sticks out at me is that your recognition here, it almost, and the fact that you tied that back to your choir, and that this recognition isn't really, obviously can't be influential without the choir, and that is true of all of us and what we do. And it makes me, I mean, you've maybe never made this connection for yourself, but it just, the connection jumped out when you were telling your story. It reminded me the story all the way back to your father not really recognizing the significance of what you were doing until it got you a plane ticket to Japan, and then suddenly he's on board. And I feel like maybe this, this influence of the choir in Nairobi there has kind of snuck up on you, and it's become bigger than you ever thought. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. Thanks for putting it in such a better way than I would have, Chris. When I formed the Nairobi Chamber Chorus in 2005, as I told you, it was because of motivation from what I had been doing, being a member of the World Youth Choir. And while I was in Miami, I sang with a nice little group there called Jubilate. And Jubilate was a small group of about 25 people. And I really enjoyed what they were doing. But, all those experiences that I had, being in the World Youth Choir and being in Miami, singing with my professor's church choir and singing with Jubilate and singing with the university chorale, all those influences really had an impact in my life as a choral musician. And when I went back home, I thought, how can I give back to the society what I have been so lucky to receive? And that's why I started the Nairobi Chamber Chorus, because at that time, a lot of choirs that were coming up in Nairobi were coming up, but they were not singing some of the songs or to the sound that I had experienced in Japan, in Miami, and in Kenya for that matter. I had experienced also some really good singing from one of the groups called Muungano National Choir. And I wanted to expand that space of good choral singing. I wanted to give young and upcoming choral singers the opportunity to interact with good choral singing and to also interact with new music from around Kenya, around Africa, and around the world. So I wanted to form this ring, that was expanding, starting from within the Nairobi, a little city in Africa, and the ring expanding out into the world. And I
Yeah.
wanted these young people that would join Nairobi Chamber Chorus to experience new music, but also to experience the world because of what I saw in my village when I came back from Japan, that everyone was so interested in understanding what happened. How was it there? And to me, this was immediately expanding the knowledge of the villagers of what the world is like through me. And I thought to myself, if I have more Kenyans in my kind of situation, then we're going to have this ripple effect. And we're going to have a lot more people understanding what the world is like. And maybe one day we'll be peaceful. And I will tell you, Chris, that
Yeah.
that strategy has really borne fruit for me, because since 2005, the Nairobi Chamber Chorus has been very lucky that we have managed to travel around Kenya, we have managed to travel around Eastern Africa, and everywhere we go, we have been met with such response of, my God, we didn't know a choir can sound like that. And so the influence has become really widespread, not only in Kenya, not only in East Africa. And even when we travel abroad, which we have done many times, we bring African choral music to an international community and they start interacting with that music. And sometimes we find people who have already experienced African music and they just appreciate it in a different way from the way Nairobi Chamber Chorus is singing it, or they interact again with new music from Africa that they have not experienced before. I think for me, the joy is having Nairobi Chamber Chorus and having more and more Kenyans being in my shoe, that they're experiencing different cultures within Kenya, they're experiencing different cultures within Africa and the world. And when they go back to their homes, however small, however big those families are, they have a story to tell. And that way, I hope that people will be able to understand each other a little more.
Yeah, I love that. I love that philosophy, and I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, a lot of what we do in choral music is um, it is trying to help people learn how to understand each other. And one of the ways that I think the art form does that is that it presents a lot of very human and very universally human experiences and
Yes.
emotions and stories, and I think it actually makes it come alive for people to hear. Let's say, for example, if your choir came to my town and sang for people here in my town, they might hear the voices and the music that you bring might sound different than what they're used to hearing,
Yeah.
but then they experience that the story oftentimes is the same. And by hearing that those human stories sound different, it's like almost like a metaphor for just people who look different.
Yeah.
We look different. It doesn't mean that we feel different emotions. It doesn't mean we love our families differently. All of those things are universal, and I think that's what choral music does. It's a beautiful story. Now, if you wouldn't mind, before we are done today, could we talk a little bit more about the choir itself? So the Nairobi Chamber Choir. I'm interested in things like, how do you find your singers? Are they recruited? What kinds of rehearsals do you do? What is the structural aspect of the choir that people might find interesting, how it's set up?
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And I want to go back to something you said earlier on before I answer your question.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
you said you did background vocals for Josh Groban.
Yeah.
I will tell you a little story as well. While I was a student at the University of Miami in 2004, I think, Josh Groban performed in Florida, and
Okay.
and the choir I was singing with then, called Jubilate, was asked to do background vocals for him.
Oh, yeah.
And so I have been in your shoes before as well.
We've both really made it then.
We made it. We made it. Yeah, but again, before I answer your Nairobi Chamber Chorus question, I also wanted to follow up on the issue about people experiencing different music. I've been quite fascinated by the audiences that we've met around the world, and I often wonder to myself the power of music, and particularly the power of choral music. It's interesting that people experience music differently, but I've often been fascinated by people listening to a piece of music in a foreign language and just analyzing the effect of the music on the audience, who are clearly not from that cultural background.
Mm-hmm.
That has often for me been quite intriguing to see how we musicians communicate with the community. We communicate with our audiences in such a special way, because there is a time we were performing with the Nairobi Chamber Chorus in University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. The concert hall was completely full. I think it took about 600 to 800 people. And we were on stage and we started singing this African prayer for peace. And immediately we started this song, you could hear a pin drop silence. And the mood was exactly what the song talks about. You could feel the mood in the house, that no one in that audience was understanding the words, the text to the music, but they were reacting to it. And they were reacting to it in the exact right way. So for me, I think we choral musicians have we have a powerful tool that we can use for the good of this world. It really fascinates me when I experience those situations. Over to the Nairobi Chamber Chorus. Since I started the Nairobi Chamber Chorus, I had the idea that, first of all, I thought the choir might be able to travel. I just didn't know it was going to be able to travel the way it has done now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right from that moment, I said to myself, I do not want a big choir that is going to be a problem traveling with. Because financially, because I had already traveled and I knew how much it costs, to travel, it was really expensive. So I wasn't going to put that problem on me. So I decided that the Nairobi Chamber Chorus was going to be small enough that we can manage to travel when need be. So I put a cap to 25 at any given time. And I also put a cap on the age, the lower age limit. In Kenya and in most African countries, someone becomes an adult at 18. And so
Mm-hmm.
after 18, you are regarded an adult, and whatever you do, your parents do not necessarily have too much say over it. And so for us to travel, I started thinking about, by the way, uh, all this parental permission and so on. Safeguarding, that's what it's called nowadays. It's a big thing. I started thinking about safeguarding a very long time ago. And so I did not want people who were below 18 that were still regarded children. And so if I was to travel with them, their parents would either have to come, or, there would be such a problem for them to get visas and so on and so forth. So I decided that the lower limit was going to be 19 years old. I wanted to have an upper limit, but at that time, I just wanted singers, so I did not want to to limit. Yeah. But anyway, I sent word round, and as they say, the best form of publicity is word of mouth. And word went round that, a new choir is being formed in town. If you want to, you can get in touch with, Ken Wakia. And so I got a few people. I think to begin with, I had about 14 or so sign up. And then we started singing. And at that time, there were much fewer choirs of this style. A lot of choirs were either affiliated to a church, they were either affiliated to a university, or, an institution of sorts. And here I wanted a choir that was not affiliated to any church, not affiliated to any institution, because then it could give me the freedom to welcome anyone from any part of Nairobi. We call it Nairobi Chamber Chorus because I also wanted the convenience of rehearsal, plays, and venue. Because if I had, again, going back to the economic thing, if I had members from as far as Mombasa or Kwale or Kisumu, Nakuru, wherever, I could not bring them together easily,
Right.
because those are like 8-hour bus rides. So I could not manage that. So I decided to keep it to Nairobi. But even in doing so, I wanted the choir to reflect, in a way, the Kenyan society. And Kenya has about 52 different tribes. Of course, if I wanted it to exactly reflect the Kenyan society, I would have 52 members.
Yeah.
But I wanted it small. So again, I was being contradictory in my dreams. But I wanted the choir to reflect the Kenyan community, the Kenyan tribes. So I very intentionally invited people from different tribes, even though in Nairobi, I wanted the choir to have different cultures, different tribes represented. Because, as you well know, Chris, that if you have all those different cultures in your choir, it makes it richer. You eventually have, in fact, in my opinion, you have a better sound when you have different people from different parts of cultures coming together to sing. Because, and I think I've read this somewhere, that the tone or the vocal, the tonal balance, the tonal blend in a choir is the result of the different cultures, not cultures, but different colors of
Yes.
voices that come together to produce this. So I thought, as many cultures, Kenyan cultures that were represented in the Nairobi Chamber Chorus, the better for me. So I very deliberately went out and invited people from different communities. So that first recruitment was much more relaxed and much more strategically driven. But the moment we started performing in concert halls and inviting audiences, then we started getting people requesting to join the choir. And we started a waiting list, so that because I didn't want it to go over a certain number, I could only recruit someone if I had space in a particular voice. So we had a waiting list, but also we would advertise. And the moment social media came in, then it became a little easier for us that we could just put a call for auditions on our social media pages. So I do the recruitment in different ways. We use social media, we use word of mouth, and we also use particularly our networks of other choral directors around. And the Nairobi Chamber Chorus rehearses only once a week.
Wow. Okay.
It is a purely voluntary group. We do not charge membership fees. Right now, I spend more of my time in the UK, by the way, because of family reasons. My wife is from here, and we are here for family reasons. But you know, I had something else I wanted to tell you, but when people call us now that they want to join the choir, we are often full and we cannot take. And this is a good problem, as you know, that
Sure.
this is
Yeah.
a good problem to have. But we rehearse only once a week on a Sunday, and all the members are voluntary members. When I moved here, we found a choir that both my wife and I belong to. But you pay a membership fee. You pay to sing in the choir. This is something that we don't know in Kenya. And so groups like Nairobi Chamber Chorus, it's all voluntary. People use their money to use public transportation to go and sing. They don't pay any membership fees. Or, where we have the biggest hit is when we need to transport people uh, around the world. Then we start, we do the usual thing that all choirs do, fundraising. We do concerts to raise our funds. We call friends. We don't have that many rich friends, but the few that we have are very helpful. So the travels are often, of course, very, very difficult, difficult aspect. And it takes us all back to your initial conversation about the economy. I hope I answered your question in a very long
And yes.
way.
Oh no, yeah, you got to everything. I think this has been really informative, and I've just been fascinated to hear what life is like being Ken. Ken, thank you so much for spending an hour with me.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me, and I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.